All right, thanks, Jesse. I appreciate that was a great intro. I'm Marc Steiner. Good to be here with you all. And we're about to have a panel discussion. And I introduced you to the panelists. We can begin our conversation. And I want to say, first of all, thanks to all this. We've launched here a $40,000 in 40 days as a fundraising campaign to this virtual event. So help us build on this year's success by making a donation today, right now, as you hear this panel unfold. And so far, we've raised $8,195 towards that goal, which means we have a little ways to go. So make your contribution today, and you can do that at connect.clickandpledge.com, and you can see it right there. And please join us and show your support today for all the work that's going on here. And to talk about this work, let's think about where we are at this very moment. I mean, we're living in really unprecedented times. It's estimated that 23 million people have hit the streets to protest racism and police brutality in this country. And while we're in the midst of this COVID pandemic, it's all taking place at that same time, and was brought to us by habitat loss. And who knows what viruses lurk to be unleashed by the melting permafrost. Our lives have been interrupted and changed, and we'll also face the gravest political crisis in the nation's living memory. So how does this affect us here in the Chesapeake? How does it change and affect the work of the Riverkeepers, the Coastkeepers, now and in the future? All of our panelists have spoken to this. Fred Tutman, who is a Patuxent Riverkeeper, has spoken eloquently about race and the environmental movement. Kathy Phillips, the Assateague Coastkeeper, has made us all aware of the spread of COVID because of the poultry industry that's devastating the Latino community. Mark Frondorf, the Shenandoah Riverkeeper, has talked about how equitable work is critical, and Tim Trumbauer, who's Chestertown Waterkeeper and part of the Shore Rivers Network, has gone beyond the river to look at housing and equity along the river. So I say welcome to all the panelists, and it's good to have you all with us here. Are we all logged on there? Good, there we are. I see everybody. People are popping up. There's Kathy Phillips, and there's Tim, and I guess pretty soon they'll have Fred. Are you there?
Working on it. There we go. Slow computer.
You're here. That's good. That's a good thing. So let me just begin, Fred. I mean, you in our chats leading up to this conversation, you really laid out some really tough, hard, and serious conversations about race and riverkeepers and the environmental movement and where we go. So launch into that for us. Let's begin there.
So I've learned or observed over time that the Riverkeeper model, I think, has a high bar in terms of our capacity to represent and speak on behalf of and connect to our watersheds, because our movement awards exclusive jurisdictions. There's only one Riverkeeper per watershed. So it's not as though others can step up and say, I'm the Riverkeeper too. So in effect, we have this obligation to make sure we are as representative as possible, which isn't easy to do, right? Because these are complicated social scenarios, complicated watersheds. But that's huge because not everyone sees the same thing. You know, in Jesse's setup, he was talking about, you know, the problems we all face, and we all face those problems very differently based on our circumstances, our means, our situation, our surroundings. So I mean, maybe I'll just kind of leave it there, but my sense of things is that waterkeepers are really on the cutting edge of being truly connective in these watersheds, right? If we don't talk to the folks who have possession of the worst problems, you know, as well as the other end of the spectrum as well, then we would be failing in terms of our capacity to really be reflective, representative, inclusive in these watersheds.
So let's take it beyond that. I mean, one of the things that you talked about here, I think, Fred, and I want other panelists to pick up on this, I mean, is that you've talked a lot about how the environmental movement and even the Riverkeepers in general are a predominantly white movement, and we're in a very different world today. We're in a very different time when the struggles of people around environmental justice and community are really changing the way we approach the work that everybody does. So let's explore a minute together and how that affects your work.
Sure. So one of my frustrations is that environmental justice is usually its own bullet, right? To me, all of the work we should be doing should have at its heart the willingness to create equity and justice. The same problems that we're fighting in pollution happen to be the exact same problems that we face in a lot of these other social problems: poverty, you know, disenfranchisement, racism. They really are all really connected in my view. These are things that we really should be working on, literally embedded in all of our work. And yet there's a tendency, I think, in a movement that is predominantly white, is for people to work on the problems they see. And so it occurs to me sometimes people can't see the same problems because of that divide, right? A lot of our work is helping, again, connect these communities and these people so that each other, so that we can actually see what each one another see and work on common problems. So that's really where the environmental justice thing comes in. It really needs to be and should be at the heart of all the stuff we're doing, not its own little footnote. Oh, we did some other stuff, and right, by de facto, all that other stuff, is that the environmental injustice, right? If the environmental justice is in this box, what's in all the other boxes that we're working on? Are those not so just? You see the problem? Maybe it's a philosophical problem, but it's one I've really struggled with in this work, and my colleagues here have too, as well, certainly.
So, I mean, go ahead, Kathy, go ahead, please.
Yeah, working down here on the lower shore, where we are very rural, but we have a massive presence by the poultry industry and other agricultural industries, where we have African American and mostly Latinx farm workers out in the fields exposed to pesticides, and then of course those who are working inside the slaughterhouses down here in lower Delaware and on the lower shore. And that was something that COVID-19 just shined a huge spotlight on, was the inability of, for instance, in the slaughterhouses, for the poultry companies to realize just how Route 13 between Accomack County, Virginia, where the largest processing plants are, and Sussex County, Delaware, where there are 2 other processing plants plus some in between, that this major highway would just become a conduit for the COVID virus, where these farm workers and slaughterhouse workers were being exposed on a daily basis. They needed to go to work. They had to go to work. There were no provisions for them to stay home, to take a leave of absence. And so they were being exposed on a daily basis and then taking it back to their communities. And so we had a huge impact here on the lower shore, and it wasn't to the white communities. It was to our African American and Latinx communities. And the companies finally began to take some responsibility, but it was really too little too late. And we had a massive hotspot down here on the Eastern Shore for quite some time. And quite frankly, a number of us knew that was coming. And it was just frustrating that, like, our partners at CATA, the Farm Workers Support Committee here on the lower shore, was trying so hard to get the word out and tried to educate the people that they communicate with on a daily basis to take precautions, and it just wasn't happening.
So, I mean, and taking from that, and Tim, let me go to you, and then Mark, I want you to jump in this as well. Obviously, I want to know how what we're facing today, what's been outlined in a sense by Fred and Kathy, and what's been outlined by the larger national picture that clearly affects all of us right now. How does this change the nature of your work? And that's something for all of us to explore. What does it change in how you organize, how you approach things, and what we're affected by? Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I mean, it's changed a lot, and a lot's changed in the past, well, since the beginning of 2020, really. And at Shore Rivers, we've been to the trainings, we've been participating, we've been trying to be good community members and things like that. We've really benefited, all the Riverkeepers at Shore Rivers and Waterkeepers Chesapeake, from Fred's leadership at our annual conference and some of these issues. But in the past few months, we've recognized that the time to kind of listen and train has ended, and it's a time to act and do things. One of the things that we did was that we actually appointed a director level position to deal with equity and justice issues. And as Fred said, there's a risk when you do that. You're creating, okay, now we've solved the problem. We've appointed someone to deal with this. But fortunately, the person who's in that position, her name's Darren Tillman, is extremely strong with these issues and very conversant. And she is, one of her goals is to create an empathetic organization. That's one of the terms that she uses. So it's not about considering equity and justice, inclusion, diversity in these little pockets and these little issues. It's about creating an empathetic organization that considers these things throughout all the work we do, both our internal and external programs. And she likes to share a quote. I'm just going to read it quickly. That I think really sums up a lot of what Fred and Kathy were saying. And it's from Wendell Berry, and it's from 1969. And it's talking about social justice and environmental exploitation. So the mentality that exploits and destroys a natural environment is the same that abuses racial and economic minorities. The mentality that destroys a watershed and then panics at the threat of flood is the same mentality that gives institutionalized insult to Black people and then panics at the prospect of race riots. So, to me, that's kind of a powerful statement. And so we need to take, the greed and exploitation that's causing this, and then, convert that to empathy and stewardship. And that's really what we've been trying to do at Shore Rivers. And that has resulted in strong partnerships where we would not normally have had partnerships. And, we found a lot of common ground. I'm not sure if we're going to talk about our attainable housing project now or later, but
well, yeah, we do want to hear about that. That's really important.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly mention that. So that was just a partnership that came up through some of this work and some of Darren's great outreach work about Kent Attainable Housing, which is a new nonprofit that's developing workforce housing on the Eastern Shore and in Kent County specifically. And we are involved because we're bringing some foundational funding and expertise to create what we're calling, as part of our River Friendly Yards program, a river friendly landscape. Now, whoever's going to live in this house may or may not have an interest in the river. But by providing a river-friendly landscape, we can reach a lot of common goals. So we know that, first of all, a river-friendly landscape, so we're talking native plants and rain gardens and things like that, it's good for the river. It also is beautiful and it's enriching for the people that live there. It creates habitat, and it's also low maintenance. So these are all things that kind of benefit each other that we should all care about. So finding these connections, these partnerships and these opportunities where we can meet common goals. And again, it's all part of being an empathetic organization and considering these social justice issues in every aspect of our work. And that's what we're working hard to do. I will say, it's difficult, right? So we know that we're not perfect at it. And, say it's a 10-step process, we might be on the second or third rung, but we're doing our best to listen and keep climbing up the ladder and always do better.
Mark, why don't you leap in?
Yeah, it's really interesting listening to Fred and Kathy and Tim, the overlap that's here. Potomac Riverkeeper Network, this is our 20th anniversary this year, and we've been fighting for clean water and holding polluters accountable up and down our 14,000-mile watershed. And we never really stopped to consider whether all people are suffering from pollution equally, or whether there more needs to be done in certain areas because of the inequitable suffering from this pollution. And so we're starting to think carefully about where and how we do our work and who we seek to serve. And we have a duty as a public interest organization, like Fred said, to truly work for the public interest. And that means taking a more equitable and an inclusive approach to attract and serve all people in our watershed. And in some instances, it might mean that we need to take a seat on the back bench and just give our support where we can and let folks lead who are suffering the fight in their backyard and in their neighborhood and help where we can. We have 14,000 square miles. We have 3 Riverkeepers. We can't be everywhere at once. And so we really need to rely upon the people in our communities to work with us and in some instances take the lead on a lot of these different issues. Also internally to PRKN, we're in the process of developing a case statement that sort of lays out why we need to do more. And we're also working on revising our policy handbook that's going to lay out the JEDI principles and how that's applicable to our board, to our staff, to our partners and programs, and how collectively it's going to reflect the diverse makeup of our watershed that we seek to protect. And in terms of some of the things that we've been doing, specifically, for the last few years out here in the Shenandoah Valley, As Kathy mentioned, there's a lot of poultry being produced. We have 159 million chickens a year that are grown out here in the Shenandoah Valley. Almost all of the people working in the poultry processing plants are Hispanic. And so for the last 3 years, in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, we've been holding an event, Rio Palooza. It's a bilingual outreach to the Latinx community in the Shenandoah Valley, as well as the DC metropolitan area. And it's a celebration of the Shenandoah River, National Hispanic Heritage Month. And, we try to, just have a super fun day with fishing and tubing and rafting and music. Last year, we had a Latin Grammy Award winner, Mr. G, come out and perform at our event. And so we're really trying to reach out and engage. And we've also been having Spanish interpreters at a number of our River Palooza events the last few years to encourage people of, the entire area to come out and participate in our events. And so, is that enough? Of course, it's not enough, but, these are the sort of the critical first steps that we've been undertaking to do more in terms of equitable work and ensure that it really reflects a diverse community that we seek to serve.
So let me kind of probe some maybe difficult questions here about the future. I mean, if we think about where we are in this country right now and how it's reflected in the place that we live here in the Chesapeake region. If we think about, as I said earlier when I introduced everybody, that 23 million people have been in the streets of the United States this is unprecedented, to protest racial injustice, racism, and brutality. And so I have several different parts to this, and we have time for at least to get a little bit into each one of them. But let's talk about that part. How does this change the nature of your work? It has to affect the work. I mean, first of all, when you think about the Chesapeake, we live and we work in an area that has a deep, deep, deep racist past and present. And that's where we live. So how does what's happening now affect the work you do? How does it change the work you do? How should it change the work you do?
Mark,
I'm gonna throw it. Go ahead,
first.
Kathy. Go ahead, Kathy. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
You, Fred. You, Tim. Hey, it's this clean water gin and tonic that I'm enjoying here right now. That's making me more aggressive. But to that point, Mark, we held a town hall event recently, and it was supposed to be in person, and then COVID hit, and so we had to pivot to a virtual event. But one of the things that we have found is that so many of these communities and their community leaders who have been in the fight for years down here, because when you talk about one of the last counties to integrate in the entire United States, I think, was Worcester County, my home, sadly. Right. But the leaders down here in these various communities, the African American community, the Latinx community, they are up against such odds down here that they often feel totally powerless. And we found that by hosting town halls, and you facilitated a couple of those with us, Mark, that by bringing these communities and these community leaders together and at least providing them with an introduction to public health experts, to legal advisors, to other community leaders in other areas who have been fighting the same fight for a long time, it actually made them feel that they did have some power, and it energized them. And we won some victories here and there down here on the lower shore as a result of that. And so that's how I see Assateague Coastal Trust's role in this current situation that we have. We've been down here in this watershed for 50 years, trying to protect and preserve this rural way of life that used to be really clean air and clean water, and we want to try and keep it that way. But I think by just assisting communities, and then now I can't remember, it was Mark or Tim who said that once they feel empowered, then these community leaders just take off. And in fact, you're going to be meeting a couple of these community leaders later tonight with the award to the Concerned Citizens Against Industrial CAFOs. They moved mountains. And so I think that's where our role should be, is we have these resources. So let's share them and just offer any, answer questions, offer advice. I mean, I find that's the best thing that we can do here in order to keep that pressure on our polluting industries down here on the lower shore to be held accountable and to do more for clean water and clean air and healthy communities.
Fred, what were you about to say?
So, as strange as it might sound, this is an opportunity for me as a Black man in a predominantly white movement for, frankly, the last 30-some years, to talk about a subject that is very easy to talk about generally in Black and brown communities, but has always been difficult for me as a Black man to stand in front of a group of white audience and talk about race. It's a loaded thing, right? I mean, it's a difficult thing to do. So in a way, this scenario we're in now gives me a license to talk about something that we've always really needed to talk about, because it's real. It's really real that we have very different experiences sometimes in this country based on our, race, gender, all sorts of considerations. And yet it was the hardest thing in the world to talk about in a room full of environmentalists who thought we were changing the subject away from nature and talking about some other stuff that wasn't in their mission statement. So it is a license to have some really good conversations. And I'm sure I hope it's not a short-term thing. I mean, I hope, it won't run its course and then people go back to doing what they really want to do. These organizations and these movements really have to change. There's really no way around it if they want the full participation, frankly, a commensurate level of participation to move these heavy lifts on these issues we want to work on. We're not going to fix this planet with just white people with money doing all the work. That's just not going to happen. So we've got to do this. It's going to be painful right? Because it's, look, the last thing I'll say on this, I think my mother's on this loop. She might remember this. When I was a kid, I went to a PTA meeting. And I was a kid who grew up in segregation and busing. And at the first PTA meeting I ever went to, a white teacher stood up and sang the song "Getting to Know You" to a room full of Black people, which was kind of corny, but it was a place to start. So I'm excited to see people getting started. Let's finish the job. This is important. There's a lot of interest in what we do with these movements in Black and brown communities and BIPOC communities. A lot of interest. They want to be a part of this. They have to be a part. They are a part of this. We are all a part of this. So how come we can't talk about it? Now we can.
It brings a question of mine, but Mark, you look like you wanted to jump in and say something. At least your body language told me that.
Oh no, I was just going to build that. I completely agree with with Fred that it can be a little bit of an awkward conversation, but I sort of feel like it's akin to a car stuck in a ditch, and you got all this inertia just sitting there, and you need to push it a little bit and get it going. And once it gets going, you can get it moving. But right now we're at that part where we're all putting our shoulders against the bumper, trying to get it out of the ditch and get it moving.
So, well, I'll wait for my next question. Tim, did you want to jump in with anything with this?
No, I mean, I agree with what Fred said and what others have said. And for what's changed for us is it's really changed the way that we view our mission and what we value and where we're investing our energy. Where we're a strategic organization and we spend a lot of time reducing nutrient and sediment pollution. That's what we do. But now we're meeting with community members that don't necessarily have that same goal and recognize these partnerships that ultimately make our mission stronger, even though they're not directly related to what we thought our goal might have been a few years ago. So I think, again, it's just like it's infiltrating our organization in a good way, and that's what's changed.
I was, as you all were talking, one of the things that struck me was going back to my a hat I have not worn in years, but I wore very happily many moons ago, which is that of an organizer, both as a community organizer and union organizer. And one of the things that struck me back then was that we ran a tenants union group, the first one in Baltimore that was interracial, in South Baltimore before it became gentrified Federal Hill. It was just South Baltimore. And you brought together Black and white communities that never really worked together or spoke together or did anything together. They were divided by Charles Street in Baltimore and they never crossed. So here we are. You Riverkeepers, Coastkeepers are in a unique role because your constituencies cross a lot of political boundaries. a lot of racial boundaries. And when you think about that, also wrapped up in COVID and everything from so many diseases that we're confronted with, COVID being the latest, most horrific one, coming out of loss of habitat. And and so I'm curious how those things may mesh in your work. Do you see your roles changing in the sense because of the way these two things converge, in terms of bringing community together to fight together around certain issues to change the nature of what we face? I mean, could this fundamentally change the nature of your work, what we're facing now in the future?
Well,
Kathy,
I think
go
that.
ahead. Oh no, Mark, go ahead. Then we'll go to Kathy.
Okay. No, I was just going to say that one way that it's fundamentally changed the nature of our work is that people are seriously realizing the importance of nature and the importance of the environment in their lives. You know, parks, state parks, national parks, local parks, everybody's coming out to use them. They're realizing how important they are for enjoyment, to engage in social distancing, and still be able to interact with one another. And before, you know, there's competition for, you know, everything, electronics and films and what have you. But now there is this growing realization of how important parks and the environment are, and the importance of clean water and clean air. And this is an opportunity for us to really take advantage of that and advance our work in a lot of these different areas.
Yeah, I mean, unquestionably. I mean, we run a visitor center. You know, the one thing everybody seems to want to do in an epidemic is go outdoors. They want to get next to the river badly. And we're not in a position to help them do that necessarily in an epidemic, but it really brings home, wow, we are so connected. We are such creatures of our own aquariums, right? You know, huge. So again, it's another license to make some stronger connections. In my universe, people are much kinder to each other right now. Granted, I realize in the newspapers it doesn't look that way, but people are realizing we need each other. We need a warm pulse, yeah, you know, around us. So it is an opportunity for us to reconnect to each other, as well as, you know, opportunities to work on that common theme too that everybody has in common: nature. Hugely spiritually connected to nature, most of us, even those of us who don't know it.
So the question is, I mean, I think Kathy, I'm going to ask you to let you lead this off here. I mean, can you take this love of where we all live and protecting the water and the environment around us, this fight that people have in the communities against racism and social justice, and bring these diverse communities together? I mean, how does that? What role do Riverkeepers play in this? I mean, for the white community, the Latino community, the Black community, but beyond that, it's also the conservative community and the liberal community and the community on the left. They're all up here together. Is there an organizing opportunity here that didn't exist before?
Yes, there definitely is. Just to share an interesting experience during this whole COVID sort of lockdown, and then when you know, the racial tensions exploded. Our office is in a little town called Berlin, Maryland. It's about 7 miles in from the coastline from Ocean City. And Berlin is just a wonderful community, but it too sadly has a history of racism, and again, divided by a highway. And so you have the eastern side of the town of Berlin on the east side of Route 113, and that is our African American community. And then on the western side is the downtown area for Berlin, which has come over the last 15, 20 years, has had this huge renaissance and is just a fantastic small town Main Street community. One of the things that, one of my hopes coming out of all of this for the next couple of years is, number one, a change in the leadership in the town of Berlin, because the demographics has changed to a much younger demographic. And they are the ones who are most interested, both Black and white members of the Berlin community they're the ones, the young, and I say young I'm showing my age, but those who are
Ain't we all?
30, 40, late 40s, they want to see a change, and we have an opportunity to bring these two sides, these two communities together by renovating the community center over on the east side of Route 113 in Berlin. And there's land there that can produce community gardens, a fantastic area where we can, there's already basketball courts. There are people in Berlin who are already talking about wanting to not only have a community garden, but other activities that would bring everybody together. And there's a great park right across the road. So, I see the environment actually being the catalyst for perhaps finally bringing East and West Berlin together. We recently had, the town recently hosted a Black Lives Matter march down Main Street, which was an absolute first for the town of Berlin, for Worcester County. And it was a very successful march and had a wonderful turnout. I kind of knew everybody that was there marching down Main Street. But again, this really showed the issue that we have a diverse community down here. We all want to live we want to live in a wonderful area with clean air, clean water. We want our neighborhoods and communities to be healthy. We all share that goal, no matter what side of 113 you live on. And so I have hope for the next few years that we'll see something happening here in Berlin, and maybe that can be a showcase for other communities in the state too. And that's not being led by me or by Assateague Coastal Trust. This is being led by the community itself. But I'm just proud that we'll hopefully have a little place in there somewhere to be part of that movement.
Tim, they will leave you out here.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that really the big thing, that opportunity that we have here is so much more engagement on local issues. Whether it's environmental issues or social justice issues. Chestertown and my particular watershed does not like change. Anyone that's lived here long will tell you we don't like change. We like our rural environment. We like our what my friend Darren calls our micropolitan community, and our rolling rural environment, and we don't like change. Yet, right now, Chestertown, in the heart of downtown, has an enormous street painted with Black Lives Matter, and there's another street in town painted with I Can't Breathe. And that, I don't think, ever would have happened before this, and the fact that that was approved by the mayor and town council. This is a town that spent 2 years arguing about the size and lighting of our local theater, right? And what would be allowed. And that, ultimately, I think the sign got denied and they had to just use a letter marquee. Yet now we have a Black Lives Matter and I Can't Breathe murals down the center of town. So that level of engagement has changed. And we see that in our environmental work too. I mean, people, I think, have been pushed to the brink. And, when someone might have thought my voice doesn't matter before, now they recognize that their voice really matters. Their voice is all they have. So, we're getting a lot more interest in things directly related to water quality in our work, as well as, a lot of the social justice work. And I think that's, and again, like what Fred started out with and what the quote I had from Wendell Berry said, it's the same problem, right? It's greed and exploitation. It's causing these same problems. So, we need to harness the energy that we have right now and use it, more for empathy and more for stewardship. And that's what we've been working on.
So we only have a few minutes left here. So, and in this conversation, which has been really rich to me, and I'd like to just let you all conclude, each one of you, to talk about how you think this moment we're in changes the nature of your work, changes the nature of the Riverkeepers' work. I mean, it clearly is going to have an effect. And let me just go around the room as we have it, and I'll go Kathy, Tim, Mark, Fred.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it will change our work in some ways, because we've always walk the walk. We've always been a fairly diverse and engaged organization that, frankly, took most of our work to where we thought the worst problems were to be found, which, frankly, were exactly those BIPOC communities. But actually, the challenge has been to convince whites that they were part of our movement too. Odd as it seems, I think people have assumed that I'm only interested in working in those other places. But the truth is, the underlying community of Patuxent Riverkeeper has always had the expectation that if you go to our events, you see a little bit of everybody and everybody's welcome. So at least the culture is embedded. So I'm not sure that we're going to change what we do. We want to ramp up what we do. I think there's enhanced interest in my job, which is exciting. Like maybe there's a successor to be found out there, because in a way, this conversation the nation's having authenticates African American environmentalism in some ways. It didn't need authentication, but maybe it did. You know what I mean? Just in some sectors, maybe people really didn't believe we were into the environment in the first place. So it raises the profile that we can go bird watching and, you know, doing all this other stuff that we do that people simply assume we were mimicking the white people, which has certainly not really been the case. But I don't think we've had that conversation.
Mark Frondorf?
Yeah, I think it breathes new life into our movement and the work and the issues that we represent and strive to overcome. And so I think that this is an opportunity for us to come together and to reach out across all walks of life to protect our rivers and to protect our environment, and also to listen and to find out what's going on in other communities. We had the Atlantic Coast Pipeline down here in southwestern Virginia, and we defeated it. And it was 600 miles cutting across all of Virginia and down into North Carolina to get cheap frack gas to the international market. And it brought together black and white, young and old, rich and poor, farmers with land in their families for 7 generations were working with tree huggers. Everybody down in this area are Republicans, and everybody recognized what they had to lose, and everybody came together to protect our environment. And so we learned what we can do, and so I'm optimistic that we can do more. And I think that we just need to be smart and to take this moment and to reach out and to make it happen with everyone, not just our old familiar friends.
Tim?
I think our goal, and one thing that I think that we're going to change is we want our organization to be more like Fred's, right? So to be honest, historically, looking around, you know, it was not a very diverse community, our tent, you know, through no intention. Like, we've always tried to say the right things and do the right things, but, you know, it just somehow the magic never happened. And this is now, like I said before, has forced us to act. And before we might have been, you know, scared to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, but now we realize that, you know, we need to do something. So I think that what's going to change for us is that, you know, again, that we are creating this empathetic organization, but what we really do is we want our organization to look like our community, and we're going to do what it takes to include those voices. And again, Fred said this, I can't remember if he said it today, but he's been really good at pointing out that, you know, it's not our role to force our mission and make, you know, different people care about what we care about. It's to listen to what they care about and find that common ground. And I think that's the approach that we're taking.
Kathy Phillips on the coast, wrap it up for us.
So yeah, I don't know that it's going to radically change what Assateague Coastal Trust does, but I do hope that that we can do more to bring these diverse communities together and share their stories, because when they do come together and share their stories, they find out how much they do have in common. So while it might be flooded streets that is concerning one neighborhood, and it might be plastic in the ocean and on their beach that, you know, is annoying or is problematic to another neighborhood, the more that we can do through our town halls, through our community group get-togethers. This COVID crisis has just been killing me and killing my staff and our board, because we're people. You know, we are just always out there with the folks in our communities, and we haven't had that opportunity to be face to face for so many months. That's been really difficult, but it has given us time to really reflect on the work that we do. You know, I want to really ramp up what we do with our Coast Kids program, because that summer camp that we've been doing for so many years, you know, that camp is an opportunity to get kids from these underserved communities actually down to the water. They may only be 7 miles away from the coastline, but a lot of them have never even been, you know, have never seen the beach. And so by, you know, with our donors and especially our donors and the Community Foundation of the Eastern Shore, we're able to offer scholarships and work with some of our local nonprofits to get more kids from rich, poor, black, white, whatever it may be, get them to the water, get them to appreciate and explore and enjoy the wonders of our local waterways. And so I know I want to definitely work on expanding our summer camp, because the kids, that's the hope. That's the future. They're our next stewards of the environment.
Well, it's been a great conversation. So Kathy, Fred, Tim, Mark, and Fred, thank you all so much for doing this. And we're going to great conversation. We're turning this back over to the folks here. Things popping up now, and making sure you all bring the money in the door. Thank you all for the conversation.
Hi, everybody.
Mhm.